Hey, thanks for coming back on, folks, and checking us out, tuning in to the Live Life Aggressively show. It's another week. I'm your host, Sincere Hogan, and my co-host, Mike Mahler's on the other line. What's going on, dude?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. It's a guy I've known for a long time, man. We always bring the best strength coaches in the business on the show. We've had Charles Poliquin, we've had Ian King, we've had Dan John. We just look for the best and we bring them on. We're not looking for flavors of the month strength coaches. So often we'll get people recommending certain people. Nah.
First of all, you're very generous by saying flavor of the month. I say more flavor of the week. More like that, man. So
people who do a lot of name dropping, things like that. Which we were just talking to our guest today about how he hates to do that, even though he does train a lot of high profile people. But anyway, we're going to get to him in a second. Before we do that, I want to do some VIP shout outs for some great listeners that have been using that coupon code LLA to get 10% off some great products at MikeMahler.com. We have Corey Burks, David Wimberley, Stephanie Duffel, Matt Fultz, Benjamin Hunt, Jordan Kramer, Gary Simpkin, Kyle Brown, John Robinson, and Fidel Chavez. They're all using that coupon code LLA. They're picking up my new Adrenal Energy product, Red, over at MikeMahler.com. I popped 2 of those before sprinting yesterday, man. Yeah, it's the stuff.
I did it before my squat session yesterday, and it felt way different. I'm just like,
oh, good.
And I stacked it with the testosterone booster and green tea, so it was just like, man, I was feeling awesome.
Yeah, funny you bring up green tea because I want to add that to my estrogen blocker next time I do another run, which will probably be pretty soon. Just get 100 milligrams of green tea because that also has some anti-estrogenic properties, and then it also has some energetic properties as well. So that'll be a nice combo in there. But yeah, I do the same thing. I take 2 caps of ASTP-B and then 2 caps of Red about an hour before training. The Red is subtle. So it's not something where you're not going to pop 2 caps and be all stimulated because it's a non-stimulant energy product.
It's not a monster drink or something like that, or Red Bull.
Exactly. You have to remember that's all fake energy. When you take something and you get this big high of energy, you're going to have the inevitable crash later. So you're just borrowing fake energy now, and you're going to have to pay it back and then some.
It's kind of like that chick that's at the bar, and she knows that you're going to buy her a drink, so she sits there and she tolerates all your bad pickup lines until she gets her drink, and then you have to buy it for the rest of her girlfriends, and then they all disappear and go to dance together. That was fake energy, dude.
It's kind of like that cougar Sincere who bought you a few drinks, and then you're going to have to pay that back at some point. Nothing sweet.
Dude, I got to give her some fake energy.
And anything going on with Patreon or anything on your end you want to discuss?
Also another VIP, David Nicholson over in the UK, using that coupon code LLA over at newwarriortraining.com. Thanks, David. Had a little mishap. Getting him on and getting him into the system doing the weight management course, but he's enjoying that, man. So other folks, hop on that. It's springtime. It's warming up outside. It's time to get out of all those layers of clothes. And, but the thing is, some of you haven't seen what's going on underneath those clothes in the last 5 or 6 months. So once you take off that, you might be in for a little surprise. So it's time to take charge of that and hand over, go over to my site and pick up that course and get back on track with your training, man. And get outside. I mean, it's warm out there. It's feeling good. Get out there and make use of all this good weather that's coming about, folks. And also over at Patreon, I want to give a shout out to our latest VIP over there is John Robinson. John's a big supporter of the show, big fan of the show. Remember, he reached out, I think, on our fan page as well as my personal page. And and he became a new member on Patreon and supporting us on a monthly basis. And guess what, folks? You can do the same thing. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/LLA podcast and become a monthly supporter. $5, $10, more dollars. It's all up to you. Make it happen. All right.
Yeah, so we have a great guest today. It's Christian Thibaudeau, one of the best strength coaches around. And I've actually known Christian since 2003. We taught a course together in Portland, Oregon, early in my career in 2004, and that was a lot of fun. I think pretty much all of the students stayed at our host's house. There was a little party over there afterwards. That was a fun weekend. And he's also the author of The Black Book of Training Secrets and High Threshold Muscle Building, 2 different books that he put out a while back. And he's a regular contributor to T-Nation. Yeah. Christian, how you doing today, man?
Pretty good. It's nice to speak to you. I mean, this time I actually can speak English compared to last time. It's funny because I actually remember that party. It was at Patricia Smith's.
Yeah, Patricia, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing I remember was you drinking a beer on the Indu board. that took great balance, man.
I had a joint in my hand too. I don't remember that. Yeah, that was some fun. That was a fun time. Patricia's a great lady. I haven't talked to her in a long time either, but she was a great host and a very gifted athlete herself. Very strong lady.
Yeah, competed in bodybuilding also.
Yeah. She had a really impressive deadlift. I think she weighed maybe 120 or something like that, and she was deadlifting either 400 or close to it.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, really strong lady. And I don't know if she's still with the same guy, but a really cool guy too. I forget his name, but super cool guy. And I
don't remember the guy's name.
Yeah, I don't. You never do.
Why would you?
Joel Marion was there at that course too, and a few other people actually that went on to become pretty well-known riders. So that was a fun event. Now, you've been up to a lot recently, but I've got a few questions actually for you that popped in my head about training. One thing I'm finding, Christian, is that I like to go sprinting a couple times a week, and I do 100. I do 10 100-yard dashes, and then right afterwards I'll do some heavy kettlebell presses, double kettlebell presses, and I always find that I'm stronger after the sprinting. I feel fatigued, but the weights just fly overhead. And my theory is maybe I've activated more type 2 muscle fibers. Maybe I've just activated the nervous system. Maybe it's psychological or a combination of the above. But has this something like this, something similar to this? Have you ever experienced this with yourself or anyone you train?
Oh yeah, totally. Actually, I myself did a lot of track work about, I would say 8 years ago. And I always had the same kind of phenomenon when I was sprinting, and then I went on doing my Olympic lift afterwards. I think that it's a matter of, first of all, you're right, you're activating the fast twitch fibers, making the neuromuscular junction probably more sensitive to the neural impulse.
Yeah.
You also obviously potentiate the nervous system, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest secret weapon you can have with training. And also, obviously, sprinting loosens you up.
Yeah.
So, and one thing I've learned the past 3 years with working with CrossFit athletes, we do a lot of mobility work, is that, being able to reach perfect body position without any effort actually increases your strength greatly. The problem is that most people, when they have very good mobility, they have mostly inactive mobility. So they lack the stability to be able to showcase their strength.
Right.
And sprinting, by activating the muscles, but also making them more supple and increasing range of motion, you probably put your body in the best possible situation to be able to use all your resources. And the last thing would be, in my opinion, that sprinting probably jacks up your natural adrenaline more so than any type of training. So you have the perfect blend to perform high intensity work, explosive work, strength work.
Yeah, it's an incredible. Go ahead.
Something that you would suggest to, like, let's just say someone who's an intermediate or a beginner. What would you suggest to them? Because I'm pretty sure there's those folks listen to the show right now who are in that category, and they're like, well, maybe I should go out and do 10 sprints and then, start my heavy squat session or pressing session.
I think that volume management is very important when it comes to sprinting. I mean, I go back to my days when I was actually, what happened is that when I finished competing in Olympic weightlifting, I was looking for another sport to compete in. And I looked at the standards of the Canadian bobsleigh team, because I train a guy on the national team. And I said, well, I can probably top most of these guys on the power clean, front squat, and bench press. The only thing I'm missing is the sprinting speed. Mm-hmm. So I started training sprint with that guy. And what I noticed, I was at that time, I'm not anymore, but I was a very high volume guy. I mean, 2 hours and a half, 3 hours training session, very short break. I mean, I have very high tolerance for intensity work. But when we got to sprinting, we would do like 4 to 6 60-meter dash. That's it. And we had like 5 minutes between. So that was very, very odd to me. But what I find is that these guys, the sprinters, are master at neurological management. They really want to avoid any type of neuromuscular fatigue so that they can maximize performance, obviously, and minimize fatigue.
Right.
And I think that with sprints, most people tend to overdo the volume, the number of sets. And the shorter the distance, actually, the lower the amount of sets you should be doing. Like for 60 meters, well, I think that beginners right off the bat might not start with 100 meters because it's hard to maintain perfect form over 100 meter. I would say that the 100 meter all-out dash would be like doing an all-out set of power snatches for 6 reps. technique will break down as fatigue sets in. So most people, when they sprint 100 meter, they will have a breakdown in technique at about the 60 meter mark, which is about the point where even elite sprinter start to slow down and stop accelerating. You know, when you see a race and let's say Usain Bolt like flashes past everybody at the 60 meter mark, it's not that he's accelerating more so than the other guys. He's just decelerating less. Mm-hmm. So what I think is that people who are like not as efficient sprinting wise would probably be better off sprinting 30 to maybe 50 meters at a time to avoid any kind of technical breakdown. And you'll get the same potentiation effect on the nervous system, and you'll have less fatigue. So the positive impact on your workout will be very, very easy to see. And I would probably start with 4 to 5 sprints for these level of guys. I mean, Mike, you're in a great shape, and you've been
some internet issues on my end. Hopefully that won't happen again. But we left off right at where you were telling me that, hey, you know, you've been sprinting for a while, you have good techniques, you can handle the volume, but someone who's a beginner should start off with less volume.
Yeah. So I guess you missed the part where I called you a Greek god, right?
Let's definitely start there.
Yes. So I think that the really important thing when more of a beginner kind of guy starts including sprints in his workout, it's really to focus on perfect technique and acceleration. Yeah. When you feel that you're losing that edge, you start to feel heavy on the track, then you should stop because you'll have more drawback than positive effect. So it's really about technique and acceleration. And then as you become in better shape and more efficient at running, you can increase the distance or the number of sets.
I think what gets people in trouble is they use sprinting as a fat loss workout, right? Metabolic conditioning. So they're thinking, you know, just fight through the fatigue, just fight through the bad technique, and then just keep going. So maybe they did the first 4 rounds with good technique and they're fatigued, and they think, okay, now the workout's really starting. Let me just gut it out and keep going.
That's a good point, and I think it's a valid point with many, many methods we use in North America. For example, plyometrics.
Right.
When plyometrics were seen for a long time as the Russian secret, Soviet secret. And what happened is that when you properly do a set of plyometrics, you don't feel any fatigue, either muscular or metabolic fatigue. And you don't have any metabolite accumulation or lactic acid. You don't feel neurally drained. So the natural reaction here is that we do more and more and more because in our mind, if we don't get drained, if you're not drenched in sweat, then you're not training, you're not creating a training effect. Whereas with plyometrics and sprinting, it's all about making sure that every single repetition is done with maximum acceleration and perfect technique. As soon as you have a drop-off in performance, then you need to stop because you're not training the right thing. What actually can happen is that the 2B fast twitch fibers, the really most powerful, strongest fibers, when you start to do explosive work, speed work in a fatigue state, these fibers will start to convert to the 2A fiber types, which isn't that bad if all you care about is being muscular. But if you want to be a high-performance machine, being able to be fast, quick, explosive, it can be a very big problem.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. You must find this problem quite a bit with CrossFit people. You work with a lot of CrossFit athletes. Yeah. Do you find that you have to help them change their mindsets?
Well, actually, it's the athletes I work with are naturally smart for some reason. I guess I've been lucky in that regard. I mean, I had.
Hey, you're attracting what you are, right?
Well, no, maybe. Actually, it's like what I've seen is that the best CrossFit athletes, those who perform the best in competition, have a natural gift for pacing themselves.
Right.
They know when they need to push hard in a workout. They know when they need to take a break or just push a little less intensely. And they do that naturally. And some of them actually, they study that. That's why, for example, it's the CrossFit Open right now. And many people are like, they wait until the last day to do the workout because they want to study exactly what's the best way to perform the workout with the least amount of energy expenditure, wasted energy, and accumulation of metabolite like lactic acid or stuff like that. So it's not just about who can push the hardest for the longest. It's about those who pace themselves properly for the type of work that's being done. For example, one type of training I really like with CrossFit athlete is, I would call that like on the verge lactic acid training. Basically, you do intense work until you start to feel a very slight accumulation of lactic acid, but you stop at that point. You stop. You cannot let lactic acid accumulate. You rest long enough just so that the acid lactic burn gets away. Then you resume your set, and you can extend that for 15, 20 minutes. But the rule is to always stop before you accumulate lactate in the muscle. That will build work capacity and will also help you learn when you need to push and when you need to pace yourself. And it also, over time, will help you delay the accumulation of lactic acid in your body. So when you train like that over time, it will take a lot longer for you to build lactic acid, even when you push as hard as possible.
Yeah, that pacing is something that a lot of people have a hard time grasping, because people tend to be impatient, and also people tend to train as if there's a timer going. It's like, I got to get these reps in before fatigue builds. You're trying to outrun fatigue.
Well, CrossFit has many positive sides. I mean, it turns people into like competitors. I mean, they want to beat themselves. The problem is that they take that to the extreme. And that's not just for the WODs, it's for the strength lift. When I look at the way most CrossFit people train, not the highest level athlete, but the wannabe athletes, when they train for strength, it's testing their 1RM or testing their 2RM. They don't train strength. They test strength. Training is not testing. When you train, it's not to see how much you can do, how fast you can go, how heavy you can lift. You train physical capacities. And the thing with CrossFit is that they want to beat the top guy. For example, one guy I work with, Alex Vigneault, who's currently ranked second in Canada East. He finished 11th at the games last year. And he has several training partners. And during training, the guys hang with him. They train in the same times. Yet, when it's times to compete, they cannot hang with him. Why? Because he always train at like 85% of his maximum, regardless of the physical capacity. These guys have to push themselves to the max to follow him, so they burn themselves out, and they don't get the same training effect.
Right. I think people at the salient point you made there is that a lot of people are trying to demonstrate strength every time they work out instead of building strength. There's a big difference between the two. We see this all the time in the gym, where every week someone's maxing out on deadlifts and they're going nowhere. Most of the time, they're not even maintaining that. It's actually declining. They're getting weaker each time.
No, actually, that's probably one. And the deadlift of all lifts is the stupidest lift to be doing that strategy. And
no doubt.
I mean, I've been like rereading some of Louis' stuff, Louis Simmons, and one thing he mentioned that, and I can vouch for that 100%, is that when you max out on a lift, after 3 weeks, your form, your performance will degrade.
No doubt.
It will totally. And I've seen that myself.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I'm a guy who like to blitz things. For example, for 3 weeks in the past, that's how I would train. I would focus on a few lift for 3 weeks, trying to push them as high as possible. Then I would switch to something else. I honestly thought that it was because it was a good strategy. In reality, is that after 3 weeks, my form degraded and I lost performance. I decided to go to something else instinctively, but it wasn't. I just pushed myself too hard. On one time, I was at the T Nation headquarters and I was doing snatch grip high pulls up to about the clavicle, and I went up to 120 kilos. And Tim Patterson walked in and he said, "Wow, that's a very impressive lift. I mean, it's violent, it's fast, it's quick, and it's moving a lot of weight. I mean, it would be cool to film something like really impressive, like 180 kilos, 4 plates." Well, I said my max is like 125, so I don't get 180. So he looked at me and said, "It would be really interesting if you kept your job." He didn't say that, but he implied it. So for 3 weeks, all I did, 2 days, twice a day, snatch grip high pull, twice a day. And after 3 weeks, I actually did the 180 kilos high pull.
Wow.
But what happened is that after that, even though I kept training the high pull and Olympic lifts, I could not even approach 180. The heaviest I went to was 165, and it didn't take long until 150 was hard. And I got stronger. I mean, my legs were stronger, my shoulder was stronger. So it's not like I was losing strength. It's just that the movement actually got overtrained, desensitized, neural fatigue on that specific lift.
Yeah.
Neural fatigue can be general, but it can also affect a specific motor pattern.
And for those of you out there who are like a little off when it comes to the metric system here in the U.S., when he says 180 kilos, that's 400 pounds, people. So don't say like, 180, I can do that. No, calm down and convert that. Put that 2.2 on there when you calculate, buddy.
Well, most probably can't even do that. Now, do you find that there's a different frequency that's optimal for most lifts? For example, with myself, I can deadlift probably every 2 weeks and at the worst maintain and more likely actually get stronger. Yeah. While something like pressing, overhead pressing, I have to press frequently several times a week to get stronger. If I do it once a week, I'm going to get weaker. Twice a week, forget it. You almost feel like you're starting all over again.
No, I totally agree with that. I would say that any kind of lift that is done to overhead, in my opinion, especially when done standing, you have to practice it often. To me, the overhead press and the push press are definitely lifts that if I want them to go up, I need to train them frequently.
Yeah.
Same thing with the snatch. Right now, I focused on the Olympic lift for about, maybe 5 months. And I decided to switch gears a bit. I mean, still training the Olympic lift, but at a much lower frequency, and focus on getting my core strength up, like glutes, lower back, quads, all that stuff, get them stronger. And what I noticed is that even though I am stronger, my deadlift's up, my good morning is up, all that stuff is up, my squat is up, more explosive, yet this morning my power snatch was really, really off. And it's not that I'm not as strong. It seems like a movement that has to be done in a precise line, especially over your head. You need to practice it often. I mean, the overhead press, if you press like 1 inch in front of the proper corridor, you double the effort you need to produce.
That's right.
Make the lift. It's not like a bench press. I mean, a bench press, you can probably train it once a week, and that's fine. It will go up.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're even personally, my squat, I can train it every 2 weeks, and it will go up.
Right.
It's for me, it's a simple movement. But the overhead press, it has to be trained very often, and I find that the more often I do it, the better my shoulders feel.
Yeah.
Especially, but I think that the problem, most people can't overhead press often for one simple reason, is that they don't know how to overhead press. I mean, they think, well, it's pretty simple to just press a barbell over your head. The problem is that the barbell is pressed in front of them. So they never take the barbell in the right position, which is right like behind your hairline.
Right.
So they
should feel like you're opening a window and sticking your head out.
Exactly. Like peek through the window. Otherwise, that way, it's the traps and upper back that do most of the stabilizing work at the top. Whereas if you leave the barbell in front of you, it's all front delt, and there's tremendous amount of stress on that shoulder joint.
Right. People complain about their lower back pain after doing what they thought was an overhead press, but it was really a standing incline press or standing bench press, you know?
Yeah. But then again, that brings up an interesting issue, is that most people, they just don't have the proper shoulder mobility to do the lift safely. So they need to do it often, but they don't have the proper mobility. That's why, for example, I really like the cervicus press to train the overhead press, because you have to press in the right position. If you leave the bar in front of you, you'll fall backward.
Can you describe that? Can you describe that press?
The cervicus press, it's a military press, strict press, done seated on the floor with legs extended.
Oh, okay.
So it involves the core a lot, but you absolutely have to press behind you. Otherwise, if you leave the barbell in front and you take decent one weight, you'll fall back.
Well, you find that with seated presses, right? Sincere, seated kettlebell presses. I mean, if you press those in front of you, you're going to fall back.
Exactly.
You're going to fall back. You're going to fall back. So you pretty much have to. I think that's right.
And using that technique, actually doing it seated, actually is a good way to kind of get someone's mindset about the whole peeking through the window thing, because now they really see it's a necessity. Where standing, they kind of have something to fall back on by standing up. So they always have that security of knowing that if they lean back and stay back, they're not going to fall necessarily if they tighten their glutes, and they don't have to worry about that. But when you're seated, you start training yourself like, okay, I need to peek through. Otherwise, this is not going to end well. So I think that's a good way to.
Exactly. And I like the kettlebells for this, just because the kettlebells actually help you even more get behind you because of the position of weight.
Off-centered weight. Yeah. It makes that's one thing I find too. Kettlebell presses. I have this issue with my left elbow. So a lot of overhead presses are difficult to painful for me right now, but kettlebell presses, I can keep it in a certain groove and they feel great. I can find the right pathway for each arm. And then the off-centered weight does pull it back at the lockout. So you have a nice fixated lockout with right where you want it to be.
No, it's a great, even for example, just most isolation exercises, I'm doing them with kettlebells now. I mean, I recently found that that lying kettlebell tricep extension is by far the best triceps builder I've ever tried.
You do it with one kettlebell in each hand, or is it two hands on one?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
It's by far, and I feel that you can actually also work with shoulder mobility by trying to bring your hand back even more so. The elbows are not just pointing straight up, they're like pointing toward your head. So that work on shoulder mobility, and it stretches the triceps more. And doing curls with kettlebells give you a much better peak contraction. And doing them also like bottoms up style, like doing hammer curls, but keeping the bell in front of your hand also work tremendous grip strength, brachialis involvement. So I think that for many isolation exercises, they work better than dumbbells.
You're gonna have a lot of happy guys listening right now. Like, oh man, Christian said I should be doing kettlebell curls.
Well, actually,
I'm gonna go put up a clip right now.
It's funny because I was since I'm training mostly CrossFit athletes right now. I'm doing most of my training at CrossFit gyms, and out of the 4 that I go to normally, only one has dumbbells. So most of my isolation work, when I do it, it has to be done with kettlebells, because that's that or nothing, that or elastic bands. So that's how I discovered these exercises, and most of them feel great. The lateral raise feel better my shoulders than dumbbells for some reason. I couldn't explain why, but they just feel better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to play around with some of those things. Now, what's your take on the core? Because that's very controversial. We've had a lot of different strength coaches on the show. Ian King's a big fan of doing additional core work. Charles Poliquin says you get all the core work you need essentially from heavy deadlifts and squats, so he doesn't add a bunch in. Where do you fall on this spectrum?
I believe that it depends on the person. I mean, it's true that in an optimal condition, deadlifts, Olympic lifts, squats, overhead press, they work the core to a great extent if you know how to use your core.
Right.
The problem is that most people, especially those who are like desk jockeys or something like that, they don't have good mind-muscle connection with either the abdominals, and the lower back tend to be more tight and tense. So they have bad core mechanics. They don't use it properly when they do the big lifts. So while in theory, if you are really functional, the big lift will hit your abdominals and core tremendously. The problem is that most people don't know how to use these muscles while doing the big lifts, right? So then there's also the issue. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. The deadlift work your posterior chain, right?
Right.
So does it mean that you don't need to do any posterior chain work? Doesn't mean that. I mean, if you want your deadlift to go up, most people will need to work the posterior chain.
Right.
I mean, if you want to, at one point, if you're doing squats, it will go up for a while, but eventually your weak point will hold you back.
Yeah.
So what do? You do work for that weak point. Just doing more squatting won't necessarily do it. Doing more squatting more often will improve intra and intermuscular coordination. It will improve rate coding, muscle recruitment. But if you have one weak muscle that is holding you back, it won't improve that weak muscle because the stronger muscle will always take over.
Right.
So you will need to use exercises to correct those weak points. So what if your core is your weak link? right? Even though technically these muscles are involved in the big lift, if they are your weak point, it is your weak point, then you need specific work for the core, in my opinion. So I'm not a guy who prescribe tons of core work automatically. That's not me. But if somebody has a weak core, then we will definitely do a lot of work to make it stronger so that it's not a weak point anymore. And from what I've seen, most people who want to get stronger tend to have 2 weak points that are very, very frequent. It's a weak core, and by core I also include glutes. In my opinion, it works together,
right.
And a weak grip. These are the 2 elements that most people, it will hold them back. It will hold them back. So, and also look at the strongest powerlifters. Right? The strongest powerlifters, they do core work. They don't do like this fancy like things you see on YouTube with trainers who are 150 pounds and deadlifting 180. But they are doing heavy abdominal work. They are doing heavy glutes work. They are doing lower back work, reverse hyper, stuff like that. In my opinion, that region can never be too strong.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. All right, one of the strongest person I work with is a CrossFit athlete. The guy is not a big guy. He's like 205 on 5'11", 6 foot. But he snatches 300. He clean and jerks 385.
Wow.
The deadlifts 620.
That's great.
So very, very strong. The guy literally has no leg muscle, almost no arm muscle. But he has he looks athletic, but not like what I would call big muscles. But when you look at the size of his torso, I mean, the guy is super lean, but the abdominals, the obliques, the lower back, it's like it's wider than the shoulders almost. I'm exaggerating, but it gives you an idea. And in CrossFit, they do a lot of core work. I'm not saying that he's just if you do a lot of core work, you'll clean.
Well, a lot of the old-time strongmen had that look, really thick waist.
Exactly. That's the look I'm talking about. Yeah. Exactly. And obviously, these guys didn't do crunches. They didn't do side bend or stuff like that. Right. But then again, they did bench press. They did many stuff like pressing overhead with a bent torso or deadlift with one arm. So to me, that is core work.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of heavy one-arm dumbbell presses, things like that.
Exactly, like a suitcase deadlift, a one-hand deadlift from in front of you. All these movements, snatches with one hand, which was one of my favorite exercises.
Yeah.
Single arm clean and press. I mean, these things are amazing core exercises.
I think the other issue with a lot of people is that they overuse equipment, right? They use I've seen people who are not even close to being strong, who have really thick training belts they use on deadlifts, squats. So, I mean, if you actually started doing squats and deadlifts without a belt and then progressed to a certain level of strength, you're naturally going to engage your core more. But if you're using a belt right out of the gate, you're never learning how to keep your center tight.
I have two good points about it. The first one is a funny story. The best gym I ever trained at personally was in the basement of a church. It was kind of funny. It was a community project for poor kids and elderly people. Oh. But the guy they gave the contract to was a friend of mine. He was a member of national team in Olympic weightlifting, and his son was a strongman competitor. So all his equipment was like half Nautilus and Atlantis and all that stuff, but they had a room like with strongman equipment, Olympic platform, bumper plates, and that was like 15 years ago. And the funny thing is that only 2 guys worked at the gym. My friend, who was an Olympic weightlifter, and this old guy, he was like I think he used to be a boxing coach or something, but never lifted a weight in his life. Now, the clientele of the gym was only powerlifters and strength athletes and elderly people, because it was in like a neighborhood for elderly people, and that was the goal of the project, was to keep them active. So my friend trained all the strongman competitors and stuff like that, and the boxing guy trained all the other clients, the elderly folks. But he didn't know anything about training. So what did he do? He looked at what my friend was doing and did the exact same thing with the elderly. So you can walk in the gym and actually saw that like a 75-year-old lady was at the most 100 pounds. She was doing a max deadlift with a powerlifting belt with chains on the bar. And he was yelling at her. It was pretty funny. But I really like the point about people who are starting using a belt before learning how to use their abdominals, because
you have 135 on the bar, and you have a belt,
and
you're chalking up your hands.
Pounds.
Well, it works on your V taper, bro. But I gave a conference last weekend, and I talked about belts. I mean, belts, when they are properly used with people who have good mind-muscle connection with their abdominals, it actually increases the activity of the abdominal muscle, because you're using the belt and you're pushing against it with your abdominals. But if you're using a belt before you learn to use your core, then it becomes a crutch. Then it's a problem. So I don't think belts by themselves are bad. If you're good at using your core, they can be a benefit.
I think the mistake people make, like in the context of the deadlift, is they wear the belt to protect their back, right? That's their mindset. Yeah. But in reality, good technique is what protects your back.
Oh, exactly.
You're going in going, okay, this is bad for my back, so let me put this belt on.
For some people, they use to hold their gut too. Don't leave that out.
Secure.
It's like, protect my back and hold my gut in. So that's another thing.
Yeah. But it's only psychological. It makes you feel more secure.
Yes. That's right. Because people feel, they're lifting really heavy and they hit that sticking point. They're like, oh, thank God I have this belt on.
Yeah.
But if you're not using a belt and you know how to engage your core, you know how to engage it just right at that sticking point to blast through things.
Yeah, anyway, at the sticking point, you should be able to maintain perfect form.
Right.
That's why I really like paused lifting. Like you do a deadlift and you pause right before or right after the sticking point. So you're really strengthening that posture.
But what if your sticking point is right off the floor, right? That's where most people have a hard time. I find for me, if I can get the bar to even just below knee, it doesn't matter if I get stuck there, I'm going to finish it. But sometimes if it just doesn't come off the first couple inches are critical. If it doesn't come off, if I put everything I have into it and the bar barely moves, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, in my opinion, the best exercise for that are floating deadlifts. Floating deadlifts are deadlift with a pause at the bottom, right? But without the weight touching the floor.
I see.
And you're actually standing on mats, like you're doing a deficit deadlift. But it's not to increase the range of motion. It's so that you can have the full range of motion without the plates touching the floor. Oh. So on every rep, you pause for 3 seconds. Wow. And then you do the concentric rep. So that strengthens isometrically that position. So that way, when you're trying to break the barbell off the floor, then you have a lot of strength to maintain that posture and transfer maximum of your strength to the barbell.
Right. Is there anything you do? Let's say I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow and do a deadlift max. Are there any activation exercises you have people do to just prime the nervous system, get it ready for that effort?
Well, the one movement. Well, personally, I rarely have people max out on deadlifts.
Okay.
It's the one lift I feel that you don't need to train that heavy.
I see.
It's all about making sure that you have perfect lifting technique at all time. But let's say that you really want to lift heavy. One thing I really like is, because let's look at what activation is. Like activation, when it comes to the big strength lift, it's turning on, exciting the nervous system, right? But you want to do that with as little fatigue as possible, because fatigue will decrease performance. So one thing I really like, it's a method of using isometrics. So it's either overcoming isometrics, so you're pulling against pins, right? So you're sitting up in a power rack, you put the safety pins on, and then you try to lift the power rack, pulling against pins.
Right.
What I like to do is do that overcoming isometrics at the beginning of the movement. Just to activate that strong start while maintaining perfect position. Or you can also use functional isometrics. Functional isometrics, you set the bar on the safety pins and you load the barbell with a weight that exceeds your maximum. And then you just lift it about 1 inch off of the pins and you hold for 6 seconds. Obviously, you need to do that movement in a strong position. So it would probably be like just below or just above the knees, not from the start. In both cases, the isometric action should be between 3 and 6 seconds because you don't want to create any fatigue. It's just about turning on the nervous system as much as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, it seems like it would be a confidence builder too. You're holding on to something much heavier than what you're about to lift. So when you go to what you're going to lift, you go, okay, this is not as intimidating now.
No, and it's not a new tool. I mean, it was used by the York guys, Bob Hoffman, in the 60s. And I personally really love functional isometrics because you can actually quantify the progress. If you use that as a training method, I mean, not just an activation tool. I mean, pulling against spin, that's all fine and well, but you can't measure the actual strength you're producing. So you don't know if you're progressing or not. But by using functional isometrics, just basically working up to the maximum weight you can hold for 6 seconds in a position, then you can quantify progress. And that should be used for 3 weeks at a time.
That makes sense because it's hard to know if you're actually doing a maximal effort with traditional isometrics, right?
Correct.
You're just pushing your hands up against the wall, like, okay, I'm going to give it everything I have. But are you really giving it everything you have? Because in your mind, you're thinking.
I guarantee that if I'm putting a gun to your head, you would push harder.
Right. I mean, if the house is about to collapse and it's the whole onus is on you to keep that roof up. Yeah, you're gonna put more effort into it than like, oh, hey, let me just practice some isometrics right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, it's a method that it forces you to be honest with yourself. Sadly, most people aren't. And it's all about that effort. I mean, I'd rather have somebody produce maximum effort for 2 seconds than go for 6 seconds at 90%. I mean, for overcoming isometrics, like pulling against spins or pushing against spins, it has been shown that if you are a non-beginner, giving anything less than 100% effort will not carry over to strength gains. Because what we want is to force the body to recruit more muscle fibers. You can recruit up to 10% more muscle fibers by doing that. But if you're not producing maximum effort, you're just recruiting the same muscle fibers you would with 80 to 90% of your maximum on the full lift.
Yeah. And what are some of the posterior chain exercises you like to improve deadlift performance?
Well, my personal favorite for myself that I really like, I like to do good mornings with a safety squat bar and starting from pins. For some reason, when I start from pins, like a dead start movement, first of all, it translates more to the deadlift because it's more specific. Like in a deadlift, you don't have the benefit of starting with eccentric action prior to the lifting. I mean, in my opinion, a properly done deadlift, even if you're doing reps in a set, it should always be done from a dead start. I feel that one of the reasons why people can't gain strength on their deadlift is that they are doing, let's say they're doing sets of 3 or 5 reps. The first rep is from a dead start, but the other reps are just
bouncing.
Yeah, even if you don't bounce, if you just like go to the floor and just go back up.
And immediately return. I like to park it and reset every single rep. That's the way I've always done
That's exactly how the deadlift should be trained. That's exactly how the deadlift should be trained.
So I want every rep to feel like a maximum rep rather than, okay, the first one, and now I have momentum, so I'm just going to stay in motion.
Yeah. I mean, and you'll notice that a lot of people, when they train the deadlift, the first rep is super hard. Then they bang out 3 reps like it's nothing.
That's so true.
When you train a strength lift, a big compound movement, and you want to improve performance, what you want is every repetition should be done in the same condition as when you're testing the lift.
Right.
So in a squat, it is preceded by the eccentric. So it's fine to go fast between reps and whatever. And bench press, same thing. The overhead press should be done from a dead start on every rep. The deadlift should be done on a dead start. Snatches, cleans also. So it's all about training under the same condition that the max effort will be done. Otherwise, there's very little transfer in strength.
Right.
That's why I like the good morning. The safety squat bar allows me to go lower without stressing the position. The bar won't whirl down. I personally like to use either bands or chains on that. It really mimics the same dynamic as a deadlift. So I start when my torso is close to parallel as possible. My lower back is arched and my hips are pushed back. If my goal, for example, if somebody has weak hamstrings, then I will elevate the front of the foot. The front half of the foot. So let's say, for example, you put some 10 pounds plates on the floor and you just put the front half of your feet on those plates. So that actually shifts more of the tension on the hamstrings. If somebody has weak glutes, then I'll do the same deadlift, but will elevate the heels, not the front of the foot. So less stress will be put on the hamstrings and more on the glutes. So it all depends on which portion of the posterior chain you want to work on.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very precise advice right there. And these are probably like people that are listening. If you're just starting off with the deadlift, you don't want to get too distracted by these supplemental lifts. But for those of us that have been doing it for a while, generally you're going to hit certain plateaus, and there's always a precise reason why. So once you figure that out and then act accordingly, you can blast through plateaus again.
And that's a very good point. I think that a lot of people, they are, I mean, let's be honest. People, they want to discuss training methods. They want to discuss
more than training. Yeah. It's a lot easier to talk about this stuff,
but not
just
do it. They also want to talk about like what's the perfect sets and reps, what's the perfect assistance exercises. I mean, these are sexy conversations. But if we talk about making sure that every repetition is technically perfect, then you're losing most of the people. Yet, that's the only important thing in my opinion. I mean, you can have the best sets and rep scheme in the world. I mean, a set and rep scheme, it's really just a way to put together many repetitions. So if these repetitions are never done the same way, if there's never repeated from rep to rep, then it doesn't matter. I mean, it's all about having as many perfect repetitions as possible. And I find that when I'm training for strength, the main benefit of varying the sets and reps is just to make sure that most of the repetition are done in a mental state that allows me to have maximum performance. I'll give you an example. We all know about the 3-2-1 rep scheme, right?
Right.
Like 3-2-1 waves. You do one set of 3 reps, then you add some weight, you do 2 reps, add some weight, do 1. If you were successful, you start a second wave using the same pattern, but using a bit more weight, and you stop when you can't complete a wave. Well, in my opinion, I mean, it's the reason why waves work. It's not so much about neurological potentiation, although that happens, but it happens with any form of heavy lifting. It's that it puts you in a positive mindset on every set. Let me explain. You do 3 reps, then you have to add weight. It's heavier. Yeah, but it's easy. It's only 2 reps now. So you are in a positive mindset. Then you move to 1. Oh, it's super heavy. Yeah, but it's only 1 rep. Come on, that's easy. Then you complete the wave. You start a new one. 3 reps, that's a long time. Yeah, but it's 20 pounds less than you just did. It's going to be easy. So every set, it's easier and easier. That's why, for example, my favorite all-time sets and rep schemes is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Like one set of 5, one set of 4 with heavier, one set of 3 with heavier. Because to me, every set, although it's heavier and more demanding, it feels easier because I'm doing less reps. So as the sets progress, I'm in a better and better and better mindset. So that's just, in my opinion, one of the reasons why varying the sets and rep schemes is important, more to give you in a positive mindset. More so than just the physiological and neurological effect. Right. Because to be honest, doing work in the 80 to 100% range, if you do the proper number of repetition, it doesn't matter really how you assemble those reps if they are done with technical precision. It's just a matter of keeping you motivated in a positive mindset.
I think those are important points because a lot of people do They tend to know more about programs, what programs are out there, what options to take advantage of. But when it comes to their actual technique, that's usually where the flaws are. I mean, it's rare I see really good deadlift technique or really good squat technique.
Oh, yeah. Most people, take the deadlift, for example, most people will just lift the barbells straight up from the floor. So it's all lower back. It's all lower back. And that's one mistake. But yeah, before you even need to think about using special methods, assistance exercise and stuff like that, you need to master perfect technique. And to me, there's no way around it. You have to focus on perfecting every repetition, and it's all about frequency. If you want to be good at a movement, you need to practice it often. Now, obviously, once you're good at a movement, let's say deadlift, for example, you don't need to practice it as often.
Right.
But while you're learning the motor pattern and you're ingraining it and you're working on a coordination, muscle recruitment, you need to train that lift often. That's why I feel that for best result, initially, the deadlift should not be trained heavy. Because if you train a deadlift heavy, you can't train it often. It's the most draining lift. It will put pain on you in places you don't even suspect.
Right.
So you can't practice it often. So
you really can't even practice good technique either, right? Because you're so big, you're so focused on trying to lift something heavy that you're just trying to get the job done.
And the thing is that, and that's a good point, the deadlift, it's probably the only movement that when you begin, when you're a beginner and you don't yet have the foundation of technique and stuff like that, and probably lift more using bad techniques.
Right.
You know, a pro lifter, a very high level lifter will lift better with good technique. But when you're a beginner, you can lift with round back and stuff, and it will work because you have some strength that will allow you to lift the weight, and you're not strong enough yet for your weaknesses to hold you back. So people will break form and they can lift more weight. The problem is that, in my opinion, a true max is the max that is done with perfect technique.
Right.
That is a training max, obviously. I mean, if you are doing a competition, you need to win, then it's fine to have a technique breakdown, but it's not the same thing. That's more of a competition max, which is normally 10% higher than your training perfect form max. And that's one problem I see with, all these programs using percentages like progression from week to week. And I've created such programs. The problem is that in the programs, it's in the people doing the programs.
Right. No one's honest with the 1 rep max. That's where people go, I tried the Ed Cohen deadlift program. It didn't work. And then I go, you didn't work because you didn't calculate your honest 1 rep max. I mean, they're missing reps the 3rd week in.
Exactly. And they're accumulating so much stress just to get those reps in. I mean, these programs should not be hard until the 6th week.
Right.
And the thing is that, most people, and I'm not proud of that. I've done that myself when I was 18. The first time I did the Dr.
When you were 18.
80 days program.
Yeah.
What I did was that I had this Excel spreadsheet, right? So I entered my deadlift max, let's say 500. And I looked at the projected max, it's going to be 545. Yeah, but I really want to get 565. Right. So I worked the program so that at the end it would be 565.
Right.
So obviously screwed myself up. But most people do that. Or they go with their all-time max that they hit once in a perfect possible situation.
25 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And that's even worse when you're doing the Olympic lifts because
I think it's better to just err on the side of lighter, right? Like if you're like, I know I can deadlift 500 pounds, but I barely got. So let's put it at 475. Let's put it at 480. I mean, you're still going to get great results, and you're going to build confidence.
Psychologically, you're going to really feel good going in there. So I can actually push this now instead of feeling defeated.
I think that's the greatest asset, the greatest positive effect of the 531 program by Wendler.
Yes.
Because Jim actually built that in the program. You have to start with 10% less than your maximum.
Right.
So that guarantees that for about 4 or 5 months, you will always hit the projected weights. So again, like you mentioned, it will build confidence in the program. And I remember when I was in St. Louis working at the training center there, the athletic director was André Benoit, who's Charles Poliquin right-hand man now.
Yeah, right.
And he asked me, well, Christian, what's the most important thing for a client to progress? Well, that was like 12 years ago. I was like, I thought I was this big shot trainer, right? Working for T-Nation. I already wrote a book and stuff like that. So I gave him the smart ass answer. Well, it's the proper selection of the training methods to create the physiological response you want to create the training effect desired. So he looked at me and said, that's not it at all. You're not even close. So I said, well, the proper selection of the exercises to respect the biomechanics of the client to make sure that the progress is properly suited for his body type. I said, Christian, do you even know what you're talking about? I said, well, what the heck? What is the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is that the person has 100% trust in you and the program. Because if you trust your trainer or the program, 100%, you will get results. It will put you in a positive mindset.
See, most people don't trust programs. That's the problem. Is most people think they know better. So they'll start a program and they're going, oh man, this is too easy. Let me add an extra 10 pounds. And then week 4, they're not getting stronger. They're going, yeah, I tried it. Didn't work.
Yeah. That actually happened to me the first time I tried Westside. When I stopped doing Olympic lifts, I was looking for, as I mentioned earlier, I was looking for something else to compete in. Right. When the bobsleigh thing didn't pan out, I decided to try powerlifting. So Westside was all the rage back then. But obviously, I know better, right? So instead of doing one max effort lift in a workout, I did 2 because I want to progress twice as fast. And I did like twice the amount of assistance work. And I burned out. So Westside doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you're stupid. It's funny because I see more guys having that problem than girls.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Girls often it's the opposite. That it's like they're a lot stronger than they realize, and you kind of have to convey that clearly.
And that's why CrossFit is so effective with women because I'll give my wife as an example. My wife, when I trained her, she would use like 10 pounds per side on power cleans. And you're good for so much more. Like at least put 5 more pounds on. We would fight for like years, not years, but a lot of time. And she never accepted like lifting heavy weight. Now she started doing CrossFit like a few years ago. Like after the second week, she walked in. I power clean 155. I said, what?
That's great.
Yeah, but the heaviest she's went before was like 65.
Yeah.
So the thing is that it forces them, it changes their mindset that they want to perform. So
I think it's important for women.
I was about to say it's that camaraderie.
One thing CrossFit's done. Well, one thing CrossFit's done is you have a lot of really feminine looking women who have strong body. They look strong and powerful, but they're still feminine. Correct. And I think that's inspiring to other women because as a guy telling a woman what to do, she's looking at you and going, I don't want to look like you. And they can't get that image out of their head, even though that's not what's going to happen. But when they see other women who are strong, powerful, feminine, lifting heavy weights, like, oh, cool.
And they have similar backgrounds that they do. So they're the mom with 3 kids at home as well, and they work the 40, 50, 60 hours during the week. So they're not these women who are just like, oh, I'm an athlete and this is what I do. And that's what they're used to seeing. Right. And they're like, I'm not an athlete. I'm a mom, and I got a family, so I don't have time for all that. So I think that.
And just that's a good point, and that will bring another subject. I mean, aging, right? Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, I'm getting too old, and they think that when they get older, then they lose strength automatically, they lose power, speed, they can't train as hard. In reality, what's happening is that because of their lifestyle change, they convince themselves subconsciously that they can't train as hard anymore. I've trained people who hit personal best on a deadlift at 63. I've trained with a guy when I was training at the National Center in Olympic weightlifting many years ago. We had 2 masters lifter there. One was 67 years old. At 170 pounds, he clean and jerk 127 kilos. So that's like 280. Wow. And he snatched 210. He behind the neck push press 315 for 3 reps. And he was 170 pounds, 67 years old. Wow. He actually started training. He started training at 50. So it's not like he was a guy who was super strong in his youth and just maintained some of that strength. He actually started training at 50 and hit weights that most people in their 20s would love to hit. Yeah. And his training partner was 69. He was. It's funny. I just saw an article. He's 81 now and he's still competing. Wow. And at 69, he would train twice a day with us, like in the morning and afternoon. But between both sessions, he would go sprinting outside. The guy at 69 had a better body than most kids you see nowadays. And he was still power cleaning 225 for sets of 5, snatching 200, so squatting 400 at 170 pounds also. Yeah. So
I love hearing stories like that, man. It's inspiring. I think a lot of people like to use age as an excuse. They can't wait to get old. So then they can say, hey, you know what? I wanted to be strong and powerful. I wanted to be strong and powerful, but I'm 50 now. So, I mean, that's just not practical anymore. Now they have an excuse not to even try.
But one thing that's important, I really believe, the best anti-aging training you could do is high-speed work. It's sprinting, very short sprint, explosive work. It's jump, it's throwing, and it's the Olympic lift. Because explosiveness and speed are the first thing that goes when you get older.
That's right.
So
there was a study about walking speed that confirms what you're talking about. Is as you get older, you're walking. For a lot of people, their walking speed is indicative of their age, and when they get really slow, they're in a rapidly aging state.
Did the study also study driving speed?
Yeah, I don't know if it did, but it definitely correlates there. That's for sure.
Yeah, probably. So I think staying explosive, it's the best way to prevent aging at the cellular level, at the neurological level. Because really, think about it. Explosive work activates the nervous system, increases neurotransmitter use and production.
Right.
So all these things will keep your brain young. It's not just about, we all always say that if you want to keep your brain young, you have to exercise it. So people think about doing crossword puzzles and stuff like that, but it's also about doing high intensity work, explosive work. That's the best thing you can do for your brain.
That was actually shown in a recent study to be more important. Like the best thing you can do for brain health is not necessarily brain related activities like what you mentioned, crossword puzzles, but intense exercise.
It's probably one of the reasons why so many of the older population are drawn to like kettlebells and kettlebell sport, because they're doing that explosive work, and when they look at that kettlebell, it's a little less intimidating than looking at a barbell and thinking about doing Olympic lifting.
Correct.
But then what ends up happening, once they started really accelerating and being successful with kettlebells and kettlebell sport, then they started thinking about the possibilities like, well, maybe I should try a power clean, and they look for a coach to help them with that. And they started doing that. Next thing you know, they've moved on to doing that now, doing Olympic lifting and competing as a master, but they were the guy that was in kettlebell sport. And then just all these other doors started opening up, and they're like 60, 70, 80 years old. And inspiring people, so.
But the cool thing with kettlebells, also with these people and also with women, is the fixed weight. I mean, since not the modern kettlebells that they have now built for 5 pounds increment, but the real kettlebells. I mean, you are forced, quote unquote, to stay with the same bell for a long time. So it forces you to work more on technique and speed, and it's less intimidating because you don't. I think I like progression as much as the next guy. But I think that many people screw up their problem by having the wrong mindset of they are forced to lift more weight every workout. They are forced to do more rep every workout.
Right.
To me, that puts you in the wrong mindset. The body doesn't work like that. The body works in spurts. I mean, all of a sudden, you might lift the same weight for a month and a half, then you gain 10% in 1 week. That's the way the body works. So if you work on always trying to lift heavier, you're always working like on the depth. You're always exceeding your neurological capacity, so you will never see those big gains. Whereas if you work on technique, acceleration, these gains will come because you're perfecting technique, coordination, and muscle recruitment.
And one thing about that, the kettlebells kind of reinforce what you were saying earlier about working on that technique and mastering it before you even think about moving on to something else. And the beautiful thing about a lot of kettlebells is like when it's time to increase the weight, the next weight up is either, now they got these in-between bells, these transition bells, which are probably about 4 or 5 pounds more. But before that, you had to increase 9 more pounds, per kettlebell, which made you really want to sit back. Whatever kettlebell you were working with, you wanted to make sure you got strong with that one before you even thought about moving to the next one, because that 9 pounds makes a difference on an off-centered weight, especially if you use it too.
And that's recent. When I started kettlebell training, it was 18 pounds. I was doing double 70s, and the next step up was double 88s, and that was a huge jump. So if you didn't master double 70s, forget about. If someone could press double 70s, let's say 5 times, they're not going to be able to press double 88s once. So you were forced to stick with that for reps. You had to get at least 10 reps with 270s before you could even think about 1 or 2 reps.
Exactly. I was speaking from a one kettlebell perspective. So I was about to say with 2, you got that 18-pound increase, and you can just forget about it, buddy. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but with double 70, it's 18 per bell. So you're going up 36 pounds. So when I was doing double kettlebell work and I wanted to go from double 70s to double 88s, I mean it's a 36 pound increase. So like you said, if you didn't have real mastery of those 70s, forget it. You were going to fail.
They're painted red for a reason. It says stop, get your stuff together, man, before you go further.
But I was mentioning, Dan John, he wrote an article about using the same concept but with barbells. Always either only working with 25 and 45. So if you can't go from 135 to 185, you stick with 135. If you can't go to 225, you stick with 185.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think most lifters
milking a weight.
Yeah. there's something to be said about just mastering something before you move on to the next.
Yes.
And it requires a much more patient approach, but in the long run, you're going to be way further ahead because you're going to avoid injuries, you're going to avoid burning out. You're gonna reinforce.
You're gonna be more invested in that exercise itself, because you're gonna really start picking it apart and really trying to find out, what do I need to tweak, these little minute things. You're gonna be very much more invested in it at that point.
People need to develop a pride of perfecting technique, like the pride of doing a perfect movement, perfect muscle control.
I always say when someone sees me lifting something, I want them to think, man, he makes it look easy.
Yes.
That's what I want them to think. So when I'm deadlifting, I don't have this scowl on my face. Even if it's a max lift, when I'm deadlifting, my face is not showing pure pain the way someone's deadlifting with.
That's a good point. There's one thing I emphasize. I actually think that making faces tensing up increases the neurological stress so much.
No doubt.
A relaxed face, being relaxed in the right places while tense in the other places, it tremendously decreases the stress.
Something can be said for using the muscles that you actually need to utilize during an exercise, because when you're straining your face, you're recruiting more muscles that, you don't necessarily need that when you're lifting. And guess what? Those muscles require more energy. So they're taking away the energy you need for the actual muscles that need to do the lift. So that's another way.
I mean, just a message you're sending to your brain, too. It's like, oh, wow, this is
sucks.
really hard.
Put it down.
Yeah. No, that was some of the best advice I got actually from Coach John Davies back in the day. I was doing some kettlebell pressing, and he saw me doing it, and he goes, look, man, your face is way too intense, and you're grinding your teeth and all that. It's like, you want to be calm when you're doing this kind of stuff.
Well, he comes from a track background, and the first thing they learn in track is to keep your face relaxed.
Yep. Right. That's why I learned it from sprinting and doing hurdles. Just like, relax your face, relax your hands. Don't sit there and run with a fist like you're running to go punch somebody in the face and things like that. And just flow, man. Just pretend like you're running on the cloud.
Well, I mean, just look at most MMA fighters, right? When they're walking out to the cage, how many of them are just got like an angry face on the whole time? Most of the time they're calm. Sometimes they're smiling.
Exactly.
Sometimes they're joking around. But they tend to be fluid and just light on their feet.
I guess something can be said to walk out to Madonna next time, huh? When somebody's like that fighter. If that can't keep you relaxed.
That might actually be quite intimidating, though. I mean, if that guy walks into Madonna, then he's probably dangerous.
He has to be.
This guy knows something I know. Yeah, exactly. But there was a guy who walked into Madonna recently, and he lost. So I don't think it helped.
Hey, but look, Katy Perry helped, Misha Tate finally.
Yeah, exactly. Misha Tate walked into Katy Perry, and third time's the charm, man. Now, Christian, do you find that there are exercises that are affected by body weight more than others? And what I mean by that is, let's say I lose 5 or 10 pounds, it doesn't really affect my deadlift that much, but squat definitely, and overhead press is ridiculous. Yeah, I had a stomach flu recently, so I lost 5 pounds that I didn't want to lose. So then I started pressing again, and I was like, whoa, what happened? This feels a lot heavier than it did last week.
I noticed the exact same thing. Oddly enough, for me, the two lifts that are the most affected by body weight are the bench press and overhead press, by far.
Yeah.
And that's counterintuitive, because squat, you kind of get it, because being bigger gives you better leverages. It puts more muscle to hold the body tensed.
Right.
But on overhead press and bench press, you think, well, it's mostly upper body. So even if you lose some weight, even if it's just fat, you don't lose any leverage or anything. But it's those movements that, in my opinion, are the most affected. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was bench pressing on Tuesday and Saturday. On Tuesday, I hit 425. Then on Friday, I took a hot tub with my wife for about an hour and a half. We didn't do anything foolish, didn't get drunk, didn't fool around.
Didn't have any fun in there?
Just to relax.
Yeah.
I was really tired afterwards, so I just went straight to bed, didn't take time to rehydrate. And the next morning, even though I felt good, felt energetic, I missed 365. I mean, we're talking about 80 pounds less.
Yeah.
It really affects, and I noticed a strong correlation with my body weight and bench press performance. The deadlift, actually, I've noticed that gaining weight doesn't really affect performance, and at one point it can actually decrease performance. I mean, in your case, it won't matter because you're lean, but people who are like kind of husky, if you get too fat, what can happen is that, first of all, your stomach gets in the way, or even if your thighs are like thicker, your quads are thicker, the bar is a bit more forward.
Right,
so it changes the leverage, but also your hands get fatter. people don't realize it, but people like to do a lot of like forearm work to get their grip stronger. That's probably one of the worst thing you can do. You need to do finger work. Because finger strength is all about the nervous system. You don't have that much muscle mass in your fingers. So if you're doing lots of forearm work to improve your grip, you're probably making it worse by making everything a bit thicker. And when you're gaining fat in your hands, obviously it's harder to hold a barbell, especially if you have small hands. But the deadlift is not really affected by body weight. Obviously, someone who's like 125 won't deadlift 800. But if some person gain or add weight, it should not affect his deadlift much. But pressing is a big thing. Squat, what I found with squat actually that goes first when I lose weight, it's not so much the strength of the legs, it's that the bar feels heavier on my shoulder.
Right, absolutely.
It's like when you, for some reason, maybe it's because leverage, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm less upper body mass to hold everything together, but the bar feels heavier. It's like I cannot get a stance or in as good position. And that's funny because in isolation exercise, I could be stronger, but if I'm lighter, the bar will still feel heavier. And that's also true on the bench press. My triceps, delts, and pecs could be stronger, but if I lost weight because I'm on a diet, the bench press will be weaker.
Yeah. Seems like that's why some powerlifters do high sodium meals before competitions or even intense workouts, just so they hold way more water weight.
Well, I remember a few years ago in a little town close to where I lived, like a farmer town, there was this gym of hardcore powerlifters. They were actually pretty strong, and their favorite supplement, it wasn't creatine, it wasn't protein, it was sea salt.
Yeah.
These guys just like made shakes of like spoons of sea salt just to take water.
Yeah, the only problem with that is you might have some gut issues right before that workout. What's your take on like pre-workout supplementation? Do you like to use high-dose caffeine, or is there anything in particular?
I believe, and I really like what you mentioned earlier. Personally, I don't like stimulants.
Right.
I mean, the hardcore stimulants for many reasons. First of all, on the short term, it can be a problem for the heart, high blood pressure, stuff like that. Yeah. I'm really sensitive to that. I have to monitor my blood pressure every day because of kidney issues I had in the past. Okay. So it really affects everything. And I noticed personally that the higher a blood pressure goes during training, the harder it is to recover from your session.
Yeah.
So anything that will raise blood pressure will drastically increase the recovery time. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, those stimulants basically work by forcing your adrenal glands to produce more adrenaline. So they give you, as you mentioned, false energy. But the problem with that, there are two problems. On the short term, it can give you the illusion that you're in good shape. So if you are excessive in your workouts and for example, if you're always constantly tired before a session, it tells me that you should reevaluate your programming, right? But if you're always taking workouts, it will mask the fatigue, so you won't be objective with how hard your workouts are. So you could be accumulating mistakes that you can correct.
Yeah.
But on the longer term, what happens is that if you're always asking your adrenal glands to produce over time, like overwork, eventually they will be burned out and they won't respond even to natural stimulation. So your body won't be able to produce adrenaline anymore. So what hormone will the body produce to compensate? It will compensate by producing cortisol.
Right.
Because cortisol is also called a low-grade adrenaline because it does many of the same things like mobilizing energy resources to fuel a workout. So every time, if your adrenal glands are burned out, every time you would normally require adrenaline, you will compensate by producing cortisol.
Yeah.
Obviously, a constantly elevated cortisol level will make it hard to replenish muscle glycogen. It will make your muscles more resistant to insulin. It will keep your blood sugar constantly elevated, could cause eventually diabetes, insulin resistance, and retention, all that stuff. But also, most people don't know that cortisol is fabricated from a hormone called pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is also the mother hormone of testosterone. So if you're always overproducing cortisol because you can't produce adrenaline, what happens is that now you don't have the raw material to produce testosterone.
Right.
So your testosterone level goes down. So that's why athletes who are overtrained have a drastic loss in libido, no sex drive, and oftentimes erectile dysfunction. That's why I say that a very good marker of overtraining is loss of morning wood.
Yeah.
That's not super scientific, but it actually tells you a good idea.
No, it's a good point. Otherwise, you're suffering from the testosterone steal. Like, as you said, the pregnenolone pathway is going completely to cortisol. Testosterone and DHEA are depleted. Sex drive is gone. Yeah. So, I mean, you just, in addition to no morning wood, you just don't have any sex drive. Your energy is low. Your zeal for life is low, and you're in a totally depleted state. It's interesting what you said about athletes. When they test UFC fighters who are natural during fight camp, their testosterone levels are always really low. Mm-hmm. Like Chris Weidman's only 28, and they tested him during the halfway point against Vitor Belfort a while back, and his total T was 300. Yeah. And that's to be expected because their camps are grueling. Mm-hmm. But Vitor Belfort's level was 1,200. And this is a guy he's a previous TRT abuser. Allegedly, he was natural now. So how could a guy who was on TRT because he had low levels all of a sudden have 1,200 naturally in the middle of a fight camp?
Which would be higher than TRT levels.
Yeah, how many guys naturally are at 1,200, period, even when everything is perfect?
Yeah. Yeah. But but that's another story. But for example, personally, I think that artificial steroids, in my opinion, since they are foreign to the body, they should be tested and prohibited. But there is a case that could be made for allowing people to have normal levels of the base hormones, so that it would actually be a level playing field. Right. I mean, I read a book a while ago about a Tour de France doctor who actually prescribed testosterone gels to his cyclists. And what he said was, the cyclist comes to me after a race. I test him for testosterone, and my diagnostic is you need 3 weeks off, otherwise you will have health issues. The guy obviously says, well, I can't do that because I have 14 more stages to go to, so 14 more days. Right. So then the only medical thing I can do to keep him healthy is make sure that his testosterone levels are in the normal range. So there would be there could be a case for an argument for that, just making sure that this athlete stay healthy. Obviously, somebody who trains like 5 hours a week won't have that issue unless he's doing something stupid. Right, but for high-level athletes, making sure that they stay healthy might be a cause for concern.
Yeah, I guess the only counter to that would be some athletes who are going, well, even if I can take it, I don't want to. Yeah. I want to compete naturally. So now you have people that are going, okay, I'm going to take advantage of that loophole since I can. Yeah. But then there's going to be people going, well, now I feel like I have to, even though I don't want to keep up with those people.
But then again, you will only have clean Olympics or clean sport when you can test and do test everybody with 100% accuracy.
Right.
And don't have any undetectable substances and stuff like that. So I think it's getting better, though. If you just look at the this year's World Championship in weightlifting, 7 Russian lifters were tested positive. I think over 20 lifters did test positive. So they are getting better and better. But then again, weightlifting is a poor sport, so maybe they just don't have access to what the richer athletes have access to.
Right. And then, I think it's a tough arena because as the testing gets better, it's the ability to beat tests also gets better.
Yeah, and it becomes more and more money dependent.
Yeah, right. Like in the UFC, they're looking at the testosterone, the epitestosterone ratio. So then people start realizing, okay, let me take testosterone and epitestosterone to keep that ratio so that even if my T levels are sky high, they're looking at the ratio and that's normal, then I'm going to get a pass.
Yeah. I don't. It's a cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The people who can hire the best specialist will have an advantage over those who can't afford it. So that's why you see these athletes getting popped for substances that they have no business taking. I mean, substances that will test positive for like 18 months. They take that because they just don't have any other options if they want to compete with the guys who have access to the better specialists.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you have, for example, I won't name any names, but you have weightlifters who pulled out of the 2012 London Olympics because their teams do in-house drug testing and throughout the year. So normally they know when their athlete will test clean. So if they test them like prior to the Olympics and they say you can't pass a test, so they just fake an injury. So that's a fairly common thing. So they would rather lose a medal than than test positive for an athlete.
It's like, oh, you're testing tomorrow? Yeah, I just twisted my ankle, so I'm not going to bother competing.
Or injured the
hamstring.
Or injured the knee. Nothing.
Yeah. Do you find that most people, it's not getting them to train more intensely that's difficult. It's getting them to understand the importance of restoration.
Yeah.
As a key element to getting stronger. Like I find that, I mean, I get massages once a week, really good sports massages once a week. I go to a spa and hang out at the steam room, hot tub. I really take charge of restoration. And I find that even as I get into my 40s, I'm getting stronger than I was in my 20s. The only difference now is that I just have to make sure I get the restoration in. But I don't think a large percentage of that is necessarily age related. It's the fact that I'm way stronger now than I was 20 years ago as well. So that's obviously more taxing on the body. And therefore I need to make sure the restoration is there.
Yeah, people think that, well, you're stronger, but you have more muscle, so the ratio is the same. In reality, you have the same skeleton you had before.
Right.
The tendons are a bit more permissive, but structurally they are very similar. You have the same hormonal system you had. You have the same nervous system. It's more efficient, but you didn't grow a bigger brain while doing training. So essentially, except for your muscle, everything else is the same. So as the stronger you get, the harder it is to recover from your training. And I think that people now are becoming more aware of the importance of the nervous system in training.
Right.
But the thing is that I think the system that is probably more important is the immune system. And people really underestimate it because it's not sexy. I mean, nervous system, everybody can relate. The nervous system, if you feel amped up, you perform better. If you feel woozy or dizzy or neurologically not focused, then you can't perform. People get that.
Right.
But people don't understand that when it comes to building muscle. I mean, obviously not everybody has the goal of getting bigger, but building muscle is also repairing the muscle you injured while training.
Right.
Or the micro trauma, not injuries. But it's the immune system that is the first respondent in the recovery and repair process. What happens is that when you create micro trauma to the muscle fibers, then you have the macrophage who migrate toward that area, and it brings the cytokines. And then all that stuff, like they clear the injury, because when you injure the muscle fibers, you don't just rebuild over it. You have to clear it so you can reconstruct it stronger. So the macrophage and cytokines are used to do that. Then it will activate the satellite cells that are around those muscle fibers, and these satellite cells will be used to construct a new portion of the muscle fibers instead of the injured muscle fibers. And all these things are driven by the immune system. So if your immune system is compromised, you simply will not build muscle as fast. You simply won't repair the muscle as fast. So and
then if you're sick all the time, you're obviously not going to perform at a high level. You're not going to train as often.
Exactly.
You're going to miss a lot of workouts. You're sick in bed. You're not eating as much as you should.
Yeah, and I think that's only one of the issues with the if it fits your macros diet, right? Because It might make sense from a calories balance standpoint.
Yeah.
The thing is that bad nutrients, bad food choices can compromise the immune system by causing whole body inflammation.
Right.
And if the immune system is compromised, then simply put, you won't be able to build muscle as fast. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think it's a good rule of thumb to focus on highly nutritious food and not worry about the macros so much. Somehow people think, okay, as long as I'm in these percentages, I can eat whatever I want. And the reality is, let's focus on getting the highest nutrition possible in my body. Let's not worry about the optimal ratios or what you think is the optimal ratios of everything.
In reality, studies have shown that you don't even need that much protein to build muscle.
Right.
I've used super high protein intakes myself, up to 450 grams. I didn't build more muscle then than when I have 150.
Right.
And I think that there's probably nothing worse from a nutrition standpoint for building muscle than always having the same high-level protein intake, because you desensitize your body to that.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not just about protein are not just building blocks. Like a sudden spike in amino acids have protein synthesis stimulating effect, right? So when you have a sudden increase in amino acids in your blood, you trigger protein synthesis, building muscle. The thing is that for that to work, the spike has to be significantly higher than your baseline. If you're constantly eating large amount of protein every 2 hours, since protein is digested pretty fast, especially when you have solid food, pretty slow, you have basically a constantly elevated protein level, and there's nothing worse for protein synthesis. It works if you're a bodybuilder using 3 grams of gear, because you already are stimulating protein synthesis 24 hours 7 artificially. But natural, you have to do everything possible to naturally trigger the protein synthesis. And having a constantly elevated protein level is probably one of the worst things you can do, because you become desensitized. That's why I believe in low protein days. I mean, days where you make an effort to actually consume as little protein as possible. Then you follow it with a higher protein day, and that actually has a very, very, very strong anabolic effect.
Yeah, it's almost like protein fasting.
Protein
It's like protein fast. It's almost like protein fasting, right?
That's exactly it.
You do a fast, and you're going to be more sensitive to food right after.
Exactly.
Wouldn't it make more sense
fast.
to do that the day before a hard training session, Kristen, instead of the day of?
Actually, I wouldn't. That's a tricky question, because we have to reflect, when is a high protein intake the most important? Is it the day you're doing tons of training, let's say twice a day like sessions, or is it when you're recovering from training? In my opinion, it's probably best the day after.
Yeah, I think so too. That makes the most sense. That's when you're repairing, right? The day after.
Exactly.
The day of.
Protein synthesis will be elevated for 24 hours or more. So it may. You probably want some protein in you around the workout, even on a low protein day, while making the rest of the day as low as possible. And the day after, then you want to have a very high level of protein intake.
Yeah, what you say about protein makes a lot of sense. I remember I used to talk to Franco Colombo when I lived in LA, get chiropractic adjustments from him. And he said that even when he and Arnold were in an intense training phase, they would do 1 gram per kilo plus 30 grams above that. And then people go, well, they were taking anabolics. And I was like, well, that would be reason to take more protein, not less. But even then, under those circumstances, they were still doing what by today would be considered really low levels of protein.
I noticed and I was a very high protein guy. And what I notice, even today when I do phases where I increase my protein intake to significant levels, I always look more bloated. I have more water retention.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when you lower carbs too much, you kind of have that
look.
Just
flat, look flat.
Depleted look.
Yeah.
When you have the right amount of carbs in your diet, you have that filled out look. Your arms look pumped up, the veins are sticking out, your shoulders are popping.
Yeah, it's funny because I was recently I have a team of guys who organize my conferences and stuff like that. And out of the blue, the guy called me up. I said, well, we need to do a photo shoot because we need to come up with flyers and stuff like that. And I said, well, I'm not exactly in like photo shoot condition. I'm in decent shape, but not like bodybuilding shape or anything.
Right.
So I said, well, I'll do what I can to be in really good shape. So how long do I have? He said, you have 2 weeks. I said, well, okay, that's good. That's very good. So obviously I did what I always end up doing, which is very stupid, is that I'll go super low carbs and increase my volume. So I'll be forced to burn more fat for fuel. What happened is that 3 days in or 4 days into that, I called him up. I said, man, cancel the shoot. I'm looking like total crap, because what happened is that you're so flat that you look like 10 pounds of muscle lighter, and the muscles are not pushing against the skin. So I told him, well, just cancel the whole thing, and he was really frustrated. And then I went out and really increased my carbs for 3 days because I said, screw that diet. And then I started to look amazing. I said, well, finally, we can do the shoot now. Just because I had the carbs, the muscle looks fuller, metabolic. And also, don't forget that if you have carbs in you, you can train harder. Performance is better. You have better leverage to lift. I mean, to me, and I used to be a low carb guy, but that's when I was more bodybuilding and I didn't care about performance.
Right.
I've come to the conclusion that you can't perform at a high level without carbs. Obviously, the amount of carbs you need is dependent on the person. And you can't build a significant amount of muscle naturally if you don't have carbs in your diet. It doesn't have to be a high amount, but you cannot build a lot of mass while natural if you're on a low-carb diet. I don't care what other people say. On the short term, it might work just because of the metabolic shift of the diet. But I from my experience, naturally, you won't build muscle if you go completely low carbs.
Yeah, you don't see too many people sustaining a low-carb diet for too long either. And then the ones that do tend to be overly caffeinated. They're having 10 cups of coffee a day.
No, exactly. Yeah. Or they go binging out for a few days or something. But also, I mean, the reason why, I just want to say exactly why you can't build muscle. Because what happens is that you have an enzyme called AMPK that when it's up, it turns off mTOR activation. And mTOR activation is what triggers protein synthesis. It's basically the light switch that turns on muscle building. So if mTOR is down, you can't build muscle. And AMPK antagonizes mTOR. And one of the biggest stimulus for increasing AMPK is glycogen depletion. If your glycogen stores are depleted, then AMPK will go up, which means that mTOR goes down, which kills protein synthesis.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, and even people who don't understand the science have experienced that.
Yeah.
Just from exactly what you're talking about.
Myself, the thing is that, for a long time, I was on the huskier side when I competed in Olympic weightlifting. At one point, I even had like a 42-inch waist. But let's say that was excessive. But let's say that in my good lifting shape, I probably was like 15 or 16% body fat, but I was super strong. I was eating 5 hamburgers after every training session. It'd be stupid. I probably lost 5 years of my life doing that. But I built a lot of muscle just because I was consuming so many calories. So I did build a lot of strength and size. So when I decided to go on a diet, the reason I went on a diet was after my first article was published on T Nation. It was on the snatch.
Yeah, I remember that.
Some pictures of myself in the article, and some people sent emails to TC Loma and said, well, you will really let anybody write for your website. This guy doesn't even look like he trains. So I decided to go on a diet, low carbs diet. And what happened is that I had a much better body, obviously, once lean. So I deluded myself into thinking that I gained a lot of muscle. And in some places, I might have gained some arms because when I was Olympic weightlifting, I didn't do any arms training and no upper body work, really.
Right.
And when I switched to bodybuilding, it was mostly upper body work. I didn't train legs because I was just back from 6 years of squatting twice every single day. But in reality, and I didn't measure my body fat, so I went only about look. So in reality, in 18 months, I probably didn't gain a single ounce of muscle. It's just the muscle that I already had that just was uncovered.
Right.
And I would call that muscle migration, in that I probably lost some muscle in the legs and gained some on the arms, but it's just because I had basically a beginner upper body, because it was left unstimulated. But after that, every time I went on a low carbs diet, I always basically wasted a lot of time not building muscle.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, this has been great. We don't want to keep you on all day. We'd love to have you come back sometime, though, because this is a really fun conversation. Where can people find out more about your stuff? We know you're prolific over at tnation.com, but do you have your own website where find out about your events?
I just found out I had a website, but it's something that
a fan, someone made it for you?
No, it's actually the guy who my editor who distributes my book came up with that site a while ago, and it will probably be revamped, but I won't have any material on there because I'm exclusive for T Nation for articles.
Okay.
And stuff like that. But it will be used mostly to advertise my seminars and stuff, because I will be doing a lot more seminars in the future. Like I'm leaving in 2 weeks for Singapore, then Hong Kong, New York, London, Belfast, Denmark, stuff like that. Wow. So it's a big departure for me, because I used to do a lot more coaching. So now I really love to teach. So hopefully that's going to turn out well. But yeah, if they want to see more information, it's really on T Nation that I publish my stuff. But they can follow me on Twitter at Coach Tib. So that that's Coach C_Tib on Twitter. Or on Facebook, they can follow me also, Christian Thibaudeau. And normally when I have news or like some tidbits, some tips, or pugs photos.
Your Prada, Chanel. Interesting.
I just got a third pug yesterday.
I was looking at the names of your dogs, man. I was like, Prada, Chanel. I was like, okay, these dogs your dogs are living a good life.
I have a wife. And
you had some picture. You're like, hey, I'm still a man.
Yeah, I saw that one when he came on the back for his dog. He's like, I'm still a man.
Actually, but my marriage is it's a democracy. The only thing is that she has 2 votes, I have 1. So Chanel, Prada, and Gucci is what it is.
Well, hey, man, this has been great. If you come through Vegas at some point, let me know. It'd be great to catch up. Or otherwise, I hope to see you on the road somewhere, too.
I might actually take you up on that, because my wife has been wanting to go there for a while.
Oh, yeah, you should definitely come out, man. It'd be great.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks again, man. You have a great one. Great conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, really nice talking to you.
All right.
You take care.
Take care.
Good one. Bye. And that's, again, Christian Thibaudeau, just a super wealth of knowledge. I mean, we could have just kept talking to him. I just didn't want to keep him on all day.
It's ridiculous. Oh, yeah. I'm like, okay, this is going beyond my normal amount of notes that I usually take. And I was like, wow. But it was so much good information. I didn't want to leave out some of these bullet points, man. Because I know a lot of our listeners.
He's right up there with Poliquin as favorite guest of just a super wealth of information on so many fronts. So we'll definitely get him back again. But make sure you support his work, folks. Check out his articles at T Nation. Go buy his book. I think he does some consulting, online consulting, so make sure to hire him if you want to help him, if you want to have his help in revamping your training programs and getting you on the right course.
Definitely. And at the same time, you can do the same thing with us by, supporting us as well as the show when we bring good guests on like Christian Thibaudeau by heading over to both of our websites, MikeMahler.com as well as NewWarriorTraining.com. Use that coupon code LLA and get 10% off all of our products hey, look here, man. If we sell it, if you can buy it, you can use that coupon code and you can get it. So utilize that bad boy. And if you don't want to utilize, you want to buy everything at full price, we're good with that too. We have no issues with that. So yeah, head over.
Yeah, if you want to go, that's the extra step. If you want to be a VIP plus member, don't use the coupon code and just say in the notes, you know what, man, I want you to keep that money because I know you support a lot of good causes and this will go to that.
Exactly. So yeah, man. So you can head over to newwarriortraining.com, get 10% off of my DVD, the ebook, as well as the weight management program that I was speaking about earlier in the program, and as well as the Churria doors for all you coffee and tea lovers out there. So there you go. You can use that right there. What about over at your site, Mike?
Yeah, you can use that coupon code LLA. Go get 10% off Red, Real Energy Dominators, my new supplement that a bunch of people are using now, and looking forward to hearing people's feedback because it's great stuff. It's going to give you real energy support. So it's not going to be stimulatory, which wreaks havoc on your adrenal glands. As Christian mentioned, it's going to rejuvenate your adrenals and help with excess cortisol levels and balancing out your endocrinology. So go ahead and check that, and also get the best testosterone booster around, ASTB. Use that coupon code LLA, get 10% off at MikeMahler.com.
And also you can head over to Patreon.com and become a supporter over there. Be a VIP, supporting the show on a monthly basis with $5, $10, or like I said, any dollars after that. You can do that by going to Patreon.com/LLA podcast. So I was going to change the LLA show, but it was going to be too much of a headache. So that is probably the one last thing you'll probably actually see, LLA podcast, because
yeah, we're still looking for our first $10,000.
Oh man, we got a spot over here for you, man. We got a co-producer spot waiting just for you. That's why you will be an executive producer. So, you know, like, brought to you by executive producer, blah, blah, blah. It's the LLA show. Who wouldn't want that? A lot of these actors are doing the same thing.
You get to come on the you get to come on the show, be a co-pilot, you know, be an additional host every once in a while.
Who wouldn't want to be that guy or that girl? You know what I'm saying? And last but not least, you can support us also by heading over to iTunes or going to Stitcher and tune in. All of those great sites where you listen to the show, and rate us, review us, and share the episode from those sites as well. Oh, and also SoundCloud. Don't leave our SoundCloud listeners out there, because usually whenever I post an episode, they're the first ones that are liking the episode and sharing the episode. So quick activity over there at SoundCloud, man. So yeah, you can catch us in all those places and help us by getting the word out from those spots. All right, man.
All right, we're good.
All right, Phil. We'll catch you on the next show. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye.